welcome to the SSAA Victoria Podcast. This is our, some of us sitting here would say, long-awaited specialist deer episode. So we've got the normal crew in here. I've got Daryl Snowden to my right.
Morning.
And David Laird to my left.
Hi, everybody.
And our special guest star, Peter Burke. So Peter's, in my view, one of the foremost observers, hunters, educators, writers about deer in Australia, particularly Sambar deer. Peter's an absolute fanatic when it comes to deer, and over the last 40 or 50 years he's been heavily involved in the politics around deer, in deer training, and more recently in producing some really cool YouTube instructional videos for new hunters. So welcome aboard, Peter.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great to have you here. We'll rush straight into talking about, cover a bit of news stuff and things that have been going on since our last podcast was one we did a few months ago now with Simon Toop just before duck season. Since then, we've had duck season opening fairly quiet on the duck front. Daryl, you went away. You didn't come and do the official work. You went away hunting instead.
Quiet in what sense?
Well, in a high bag limit, but the ducks are pretty hard to get.
Yeah, no, it's a bit thin on the ground at the moment. Things are starting to improve in some places, but yeah, certainly the southern part of the state, a bit of a struggle, but we did quite well in northern Victoria, and during the opening week it was good.
Yeah, well, you were off actually enjoying hunting. Baz and I sort of took one for the team and went and worked and went up to the Kerrang district and went around and spoke to hunters and observed what was going on up there. Look, hunter behaviour, really, really good, which was really encouraging to see again. And just the attitude of hunters, everyone was really positive, really happy with how things are going. So that was great for us to see.
It's the most positive I've seen hunters in a decade, I think, and positive about the direction that duck hunting's going in. Finally, people are seeing we are getting robust bag limits. We are getting full seasons. There is a future in this. We have got support. It was really good to see.
Yep. Just the full-length duck season thing, and the fact that you know you're going to get 3 months of hunting and you know there's going to be a fairly liberal bag limit gets you a bit more motivated than wondering whether there's going to be a duck season or whether the limit's going to be 2. So, yeah, it makes a big difference.
And that's a big part of our focus, making sure people have got the opportunity to get out there and hunt. And if they've got a full season, regardless of what the bag limit is, they've got that opportunity to get out there. So, yeah, really, really good to see. And that was across the board. Everyone we spoke to was positive.
Well, not everyone we spoke to was positive, Dave.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to get on to the antis. They're never positive. They're just negative. And you had a really interesting interaction with one of them, and what did she call you?
Well, I live streamed to their protest on the steps of Parliament and spoke the economic benefits of hunting and all the positive benefits, which the local constabulary who were watching events thought was pretty amusing.
Yeah, it was absolute gold, actually. It was really good.
But then I got dubbed by our host on the live stream with a new nickname, the Fat Face of Cruelty.
Mm. Yes. Anyway, I think that's more a reflection on her worldview than on you, Baz. You're not that fat.
I was going to say I'm not that cruel, but
it's certainly giving us some entertainment.
This is likely to stick, you know.
Yeah, now it's on a podcast. I'd suggest
out there, it's official.
It's certainly stuck around the office, Peter, I can tell you.
But on a more serious note, the behaviour of some of the activists up there was quite atrocious. They got in and vandalised boats. Not only did they write some nasty words on them.
Well, they don't know how to spell punt.
No. I don't think that's quite what they were trying to spell, Baz, but anyway, we'll go with that one. But yeah, they actually vandalised boats, cut pull cords and things like that. Cut a tree down reportedly to block access into one of the state game reserves. So really, really atrocious stuff for people who are saying they're sort of environmentalists to behave like that. And it's quite appalling.
It's next level. There's certainly a core of these protesters who are fairly innocuous. They don't like duck hunting. They oppose it. They protest against it. Fill your boots. It's a free society. That's where we live. When that goes into this level of just straight out criminality and dangerous behaviour, and what's as disturbing as this level of straight out criminality and dangerous behaviour is the leaders of that movement completely silent on it. They should have been out there like we do when there's illegal hunting behaviour. They should have been the first people to come out and condemn it. And when you don't condemn it, you're tacitly approving it.
Yep, and would have been nice to see some leadership in that direction. And as you say, when hunters do the wrong thing, which we don't like to see, but when they do, we certainly call that out. And be nice to see some consistency on the other side, if you want to call them that, to do the same.
Well, you guys had much more fun than I did. No one called me any names and didn't have any interactions with members of the public whatsoever, actually. It was
you had to put up with you had to put up with babysit Robbie.
I had Robbie then. Robbie got sick, but Robbie gets sick every time he leaves the house, so it wasn't too surprising.
It's been inferred that because people were finding it hard to get ducks, that's because ducks are extinct.
No, nothing to do with the 200 millimetres of rain we had in the weeks leading up to duck season, though. So where we were, we're in sort of central Vic. I spent the first few days on private property and then the weekend on public land. And everywhere I went, there was ducks. There was 2 ducks on every puddle in every paddock. So driving through the paddocks in the Polaris, you might put up 50 ducks over a couple of 100 acres, but every depression that had water and it had ducks in it.
So they're well dispersed and
they're well dispersed. They just weren't moving around. Yeah. They had plenty of food, lots of insects, grain on the ground on flooded paddocks, etc. There's no reason to fly around. Certainly no reason to congregate on public wetlands. So they're very well dispersed. They were.
All right. Well, that's good. We've dealt with ducks.
Okay.
I mean, this is. We need to talk about it. Let's get into the interesting stuff.
We're up up. Paris-Roubaix.
Yeah, well, Roubaix was a highlight of the year after duck opening.
Pete Garcher.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have to have a cycling reference in every podcast.
Ducks and cycling.
The hell of the north.
We'll get to mention Ken Slee later, I'm sure. So we have to mention ducks, cycling, and Ken Slee in every podcast is our rule.
That's fair. There is also quail season.
Quail season.
That's been fairly quiet as well.
Very quiet.
20 bird bag.
Yeah, so normal season. Quail are hard to come by. I think that's more to do with the rain in northern Australia and the stuff we've had over summer. Pretty tough summer in Vic. Lots of dry land, lots of dry soil, not a lot of green around, and then dumped down northern New South Wales, Queensland, Central Australia, etc. over the last few months. And I think that's pretty much done for the quail season here. If it starts to dry out, they might move back, but they're highly nomadic, move with the climate, and where they've gone to somewhere where the grass is greener, I'd suggest, but they'll be back.
Hog deer season, as we speak, there's a day and a half left of hog deer season, I think.
Yeah,
Ken be out there.
So if you haven't got out and filled your tags, you've got a day and a half to go. So
and again, people have been finding it pretty tough going, just with the weather conditions. This April has been pretty challenging for hog deer hunting. So,
and certainly where I'm hunting, the deer are in such good condition too. So as soon as they get that bit of pressure on, they're going nocturnal and they're not having to come out during the day. So that's made it particularly challenging. But that's what hunting's about. It's if it was easy, we probably wouldn't bother doing it. Well, some of us would, Darryl.
And hound hunting opened for 2 days, was it, before Easter, and then shut down for a week and has opened up again?
A quick blink of the eye. Some people hunted and some people held off.
So you've got 1 or 2 squirts in this year so far?
Yeah, we've started hunting and things are just coasting along like they normally do for old blokes.
My friend Neil's the young member of your hunting crew.
Oh, yes.
That's 70, is he, Neil?
We have a great advantage, and the great advantage is we're old and we don't have to go to work. So we get to hunt during the week, which is totally different than situations on weekends where it can be crowded. And because we're all retirees, the fact is we've got a few years under our belt. Our oldest hunter is my big brother, 80 years old, still actively hunting. This is one of the things with hound hunting, that it gives opportunities to all types of people in all different age groups.
When I see photos of dead deer from your hound crew, your big brother seems to feature more than most.
Well, he does. Let's just say he's hunted a long time and he knows how to hunt it, which a lot of people lose track of too. They think that the hound hunting is just an easy thing to do. It's not easy. Not when you hunt under fair chase conditions. And that's the difference, Small teams, small number of dogs, just magic.
Very good. So hound season's open. If you haven't tried it, get your licence, find a crew, get amongst it.
Yes, well, licences now, you can do it online, which is true. That's a big step forward for people. Instead of waiting for an opportunity in your area a couple of times a year, now you can go and do it. There's no excuse not to have that licence.
Firearm law review, we really no progress from the last time we spoke. The government has the report from Ken Lay to his rapid review and sitting there considering it.
So much for the end of March.
so much for the end of March. But what it really underscores is there is no urgency in this. These firearm laws are getting reviewed constantly. There is no screaming need for change. New South Wales, who rushed to implement their new legislation on Christmas Eve, they're now looking like being February 2027 before they release regulations to enact that. So for all of that crazy urgency to react to Bondi, and we have to be seen to be doing something, it's now, we're going to take our sweet time in actually doing it.
I'll bet money that between now and then there'll be changes to the Act as well. So they race some stuff through so the public are all happy and safe, and by the time they get the regs through, I dare say the Act will change yet again. So it'd be very interesting what happens in New South Wales.
Well, it should, because it's a shambles. It's a joke what they did, and it's clearly reality's hitting the bureaucrats who are now got to try and make a silk purse out of this sousy.
Yes, I know a lot of our members are anxious to find out what's going on, but I think it is a positive that the Victorian government is taking time, and let's hope that at the end of all this they do get it right. There is no urgency, but I would certainly hope that we do hear something well in advance of the election so that people know where everybody stands going into that. But it didn't need to be done like New South Wales, and as we've just discussed, we see the issues that they're going with. So we're in a much better place than they certainly are.
Look, I think we're all quite anxious. We're all obviously members and firearms owners as well, firearms users, owners. But I tend to agree. I think the longer this thing draws out, I think the better the result's going to be. We talk about 96, even that knee-jerk reaction has always been explained to me. I think if we can avoid knee-jerk reactions and actually spend some time to think about this stuff, I think we'll end up with a much better result.
Yeah, so hasten slowly, government. Outdoor Recreation Victoria, which we've spoken about before, so this is going to be our new regulator/promoter for hunting. So the legislation to create that is before the Parliament at the moment. We don't anticipate any great changes, any great challenges with that legislation. We've had a really good read of it, and really there's some really promising stuff in there. So the first one is that object to actually promote, which is what's been missing from hunting. It's viewing hunting along with other outdoor recreation activities as an economic driver for regional Victoria, and that's really the first time we've had that sitting in an authority, sitting in legislation. The other thing it'll have is this land access panel, which will be interesting to see how that shapes up, but something that the intent behind that is to overcome what often happens with us is years and years of somewhere's closed off that's inappropriately closed off, illegally closed off. It's routine for us now to spend 5 years fighting to get that open. The idea of this is to cut through that red tape and get stuff opened up that should be opened up a lot sooner.
Absolutely, and that's a huge positive just in itself. And that last one that we did, it was literally 5 years to get a road opened back up into state forest that should never have been shut in the first place. So if this is going to be a one-stop shop to fix that, absolutely fantastic.
Let's hope.
Yeah, he's hoping.
Let's hope.
It shouldn't have any problems in the lower house, but in the upper house, I think there'll be some vigorous debate and discussion around it, but I'm pretty sure it'll
on Outdoor Recreation Victoria.
It'll go through.
Pretty sure it'll have the numbers to go through. Yeah. Ministerial reshuffle happened in the last couple of weeks, so the notable changes for us, we've got a new Environment Minister, new Outdoor Recreation Minister, who are the same minister, which is Enver Erdogan, replacing Minister Steve Demopoulos, who was excellent and engaged from our perspective. A very good minister for us, so we really thank him for the work he did with hunting and shooting issues in particular, and look forward to working with Minister Erdogan in the same vein.
Yep, and there's no indication that won't occur. So no, we're really enthusiastic and positive about that. So let's see where it all goes and where Outdoor Rec goes.
Especially when you've talked about interactions with hunters. The hunters are generally happy around duck seasons and quail seasons and hog deer and hunting in general in the state of Victoria, and most of that's due to the outgoing minister, who had a really good relationship with him and worked really closely with him, and some of the decisions and things that have happened under his watch. So I think hunting's in a very good place, and I think Minister Demopoulos has played a huge role in that.
Well, we talked about that in our pre-Christmas podcast, and we're sort of cautiously optimistic because things were looking really good. And then we had Bondi, and we've got all the firearm stuff.
We were quite excited last year, weren't we?
Yeah, if we put that aside for a moment, the hunting side has been really positive, and we're achieving some really good stuff. And part of that too is the game-changing huts. So that's progressing. Had a meeting last week with DJ Sir. We had another meeting yesterday with that department, with Parks Victoria and DECA. So a working group has been established. So we're now looking at sort of shortlisting potential sites. So things are starting to happen in that area, and hopefully that'll give us some really good outcomes as well.
And the huts is an interesting, it's a great initiative. I was reading this book over the weekend, and everything old is new again. So there's a passage in there where someone was talking about when our welcome and useful huts were reduced to a smouldering pile of useless ash, part of our lifestyle also went up in smoke. So you wrote about that in the early 90s about the huts on Mount Useful, I think, Peter, and it's good to see that infrastructure coming back in again.
Well, it was interesting because when the logging industry was at its peak, there were a whole series of huts throughout the mountains, and they were heavily used by recreational people, and which included deer hunters, of course. But unfortunately, the Forest Commission views when the logging ceased was to remove them, which they did. They literally burnt them down. And that was a loss. But I see what drove it too, because one of the things that drove it was the litter and the upkeep of those huts. And litter was a huge problem, as it is today. You know, the way people can leave the bush is absolutely disgusting. So with the new huts, that's something we need to take into account, is they're there for us to use. We need to look after them. We need to call people out who are destroying those huts. And there's one hut up, actually, while we're on the subject, Chester's hut up in the Lacola region. It was just devastated by vandals, absolutely destroyed. And fortunately, recently, some people went up, they cleaned the hut up. Hunters, by the way, they cleaned that hut up, they repaired it, and it's not back to what it was, but it was just appalling to see the way that was treated by general bush users. So that's something we need to be aware of.
And that's certainly been factored into this, and we're looking at ways and sort of models to get that community engagement and that involvement, and to take ownership of these huts and work out how we're going to maintain them. And it's always a risk when you've got these huts sort of on public roads and close to that. Anybody can drive past. Everybody's got a four-wheel drive now, so it's very accessible to those areas. So it is something that's been considered with the locations and how we're going to go forward with this, because they are going to be a great public asset, not just for deer hunters, but for other people who use those areas. So it is important, sort of as hunters, that we respect them and look after them, and the general public respects them and looks after them as well. So yeah, it's a really good point. We've been pushing for these sort of things. We've got them now. We've got to make sure that when they're delivered, they're looked after appropriately.
We also got a new agriculture minister in the shake-up, Minister Michaela Settle, who's a former sheep farmer. So it'd be the first ag minister in well over a decade with a direct background in agriculture. So she replaces Minister Ros Spence, who we had a good relationship with, who's still got community support. So we've still got some work to do with agriculture, particularly with our push for a Hunters for the Hungry program for Victoria. And one of the big impediments to that has been the meat regulator, PrimeSafe, and the Parliament's just in the throes of creating, along with stuff like Outdoor Recreation Victoria, they're creating a new food regulator for Victoria, which is merging the functions of PrimeSafe and of the dairy regulator. So there's hope that that might provide a bit of an opening for us with the new minister to push to get a Hunters for the Hungry pilot over the line. So that plays into the joint election bids that we're doing with a wide range of other organisations, so SSAA Victoria, of course, Victorian Hound Hunters, Field and Game Australia, Australian Deer Association, Victorian Amateur Pistol Association, Australian Bow Hunters Association, all coming together to go to the government with a joint bid for the election. some of those things have changed since we first came together last year, because we had stuff in there like allowing the GMA to promote hunting, which of course the new regulator can.
I think it was at the top of our list, wasn't it?
Yeah, so ticked off before we got to put it to an election. So we've been the last couple of weeks tweaking those joint election bids and improving things like explicitly like hunters for the hungry, so that we can try and get bipartisan support for that. The other thing in news that I want to touch on, and I'm sure his name will come up throughout our conversation about deer today, because you can't talk about Sambar deer particularly without talking about Mike Harrison. And Michael left us on Friday afternoon with his beloved Elaine by his side, as she'd always been. And Michael was an absolute giant, particularly through the 70s, 80s and 90s of deer politics in Victoria and deer management. His knowledge of the Sambar, and Pete will probably plug this book later, but his knowledge of the Sambar that's put in this book, Sambar the Magnificent Deer, is just without parallel. So, valet Mike.
Absolutely unrivaled, the knowledge that Mike had. And one of the sad things about that is that when I look at a lot of the reviews and studies done, and in the list of references, it never appears. And it doesn't appear because Mike had an attitude about deer, that they're not a demon. And he wanted to look at those deer. He wanted to study those deer, which he did. And I think because it's not a negative book and it's a balanced book, that those that oppose deer, they just ignore it. They don't read it.
And to take nothing away from Michael, or his intellect, Mike wasn't an academic. He was a farmer and a bloke who worked for the water board. He wasn't an academic. He's incredibly intelligent.
And one of the things about Mike too that is he had such an influence on the deer scene and the politics of deer. But I think one of the biggest influences he's had, he became a mentor for so many people, and his attitude to nature in general. And the other thing too, he recognised that where his property was ideally situated to study the helmeted honeyeater, an endangered species. He drove that. He got people interested in that, where they set up a study there to try and reintroduce the helmeted honeyeater and put them back into an area where they had existed. And that's another thing that's been overlooked with Mike. That project would never have happened if he hadn't have walked through the bush and recognised that it was ideal helmeted honeyeater territory.
And before all that, he was an exceptional hunter, great bushman, fine hunter.
A bushman that didn't need a compass, a bushman that didn't need a GPS, just... I spent a lot of time with him in the bush, and it was just a bushman par excellence. There's nothing else I can say about that.
Yeah, we'll be sadly missed.
Yes.
And if you are interested in or hunt deer in Victoria now, you owe something to the work that Mike did.
Oh, there's no question. There wouldn't be Sunday hunting if it wasn't for Mike Harrison. He drove that. People don't realise that back when I started hunting, which is a long time ago, the thing was, it was illegal to hunt on Sunday. Yep. Now, Mike saw that. He actually drove that, and he drove the change where we had it legalised. His whole attitude was, why, as a person, should I have to break the law to go hunting? Because most people work during the week, don't they? People have families, Sunday was a day when people went hunting. Yeah, that's one thing that he really should be credited for.
And along with yourself and Peter Purvis and others, the retention of hound hunting in the late 1980s, Mike had a very big role in that.
Driving force in that. I'll talk about that later, what actually transpired there.
All right, well, on to you, because that's what we're here to talk about, Berkey.
No, we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about the deer.
we are here to talk about the deer, but just like Michael, you're a huge part of the deer scene in Victoria for the last 30, 40 years. your name has been known by many, many deer hunters, most deer hunters, I'd suggest, in that time. A bit about, you mentioned Brother Bob, who's still going at it pretty successfully at 80. Bit of your background in hunting.
Oh, I'll give you the background of it in hunting, but while we mention my brother, it's a classic example. Deer hunters are born to do it. And once you're hooked, it doesn't go away. It does not go away. You just want to hunt. And one of the things in our little group, we have a saying. I'll tell you a couple of things about that, actually. We have a saying, as long as we're vertical, and it's like that. We also, now, this is being publicly broadcast, so I hope our wives don't hear this, right? We also say that when we go to bed, if one of us doesn't wake up in the morning, right, we're still going hunting with the hounds. And we're just going to come back and claim, he was feeling poorly last night. And we said, if you don't feel like getting up,
just have a
don't
sleep.
bother.
I can assure you my wife won't be listening. But in my hunting crew that I hunt with in New Zealand, at least once a year, a couple of older members, and we have a similar thing. But we also talk about, if we do come back, I want them and Deb are having a Viking funeral.
Are we? No, I'd rather a real fancy wake, actually.
We will be going out hunting first.
Yeah.
We'll come along and drink your beer.
Yeah, certainly.
What makes you think I'm leaving any beer? I've hunted deer now for over 55 years, just like my brother. We started deer hunting together. But I started hunting at the age of 7 and 8, which, like a lot of people, I was introduced to it by my father, right? And it's just gone on from there. As far as deer are concerned, they were a mystery that no one knew about them, except a very select group. And we were introduced to deer hunting by magazines and books, and people like Nick Harvey, Vic McChrystal, Philip Holden. Their writings drew us to deer hunting. But today, I think most people are getting drawn to deer hunting by magazines, such as Wild Deer, such as Australian Deer and the Shooter's Journal. But more importantly, I think people are getting drawn to deer hunting through YouTube. It's probably the biggest influence, I think, today on drawing people into deer hunting. I've hunted deer in Australia and New Zealand, hunted sambar in Australia, red deer in Australia, fallow deer and hog deer. In New Zealand, I've hunted sika, white-tailed deer and red deer. Now, just the thing I said, white-tailed deer, just a little aside on that, that's actually their proper name. It's not white-tailed deer, it's white-tailed deer. But two things about that. Sambar hunting, it's just my passion, and the deer are my passion as well, right? The second thing, New Zealand, if you haven't been to New Zealand and you're a deer hunter, you are missing out. That country will touch your soul. Another thing it does, that wild country on the west coast, it eats you up and it spits you out and it brings you back to reality. When you stand on a riverbed and you look at the ridge and it's 4,500 feet to the top of the ridge that you want to cross to go into the next valley, you then understand what mountains are. I'm getting sidetracked. I do a lot of getting sidetracked, but I was over there with my wife, the first trip we come back, we were flying over the mountains back here in Victoria, and she looked out the window and she says, we really don't have mountains in Australia, do we? And we don't. But so far it's been a journey, and it's a journey that's continuing. But let's talk about the political world of deer hunting, right? It hasn't changed. It's still the same battles. And they are battles because things don't happen without proactive action, right? Access on public land, firearm reforms, animal welfare, they're major issues. Now, that hasn't changed. Like I said, they continue to go. Now, for the viewers, I have to change page, because if I don't change page, I'm going to forget what I was going to talk about, right? I've been heavily involved in that time with deer conservation and deer management. That includes control work, because we know there are times when numbers need controlling. It's as simple as that. The word conservation to some people, when we talk about deer conservation, it's a red flag. But it shouldn't be a red flag. The hog deer in Australia is one of the few viable populations of hog deer in the world. They are listed internationally as endangered, right? So why do we have people and policies that want them eradicated? It does not make sense when we have a viable population. Apart from Moore and Mays's work and the book The Hog Deer, they have been poorly studied. They have been studied, but poorly studied. Like all deer, no one truly understands their place in the Australian environment and whether they belong or whether they don't belong. There's a lot of rhetoric that we hear about that. Now, I've got off the track, but I've been heavily involved in this. I was on the Minister for Conservation's Deer Advisory Council. We had a council that advised the minister directly on all matters relating to deer. The Fisheries and Wildlife it wasn't game management, sorry. The Fisheries and Wildlife were on it. The Forest Commission were on it. Parks Vic were on it. The deer breeders were on it. The hunting organisations were on it. The Victorian Deer Conservation Council was on it. Now, where have we gone? We had people interested in the conservation of deer, right? Because they were seen to have a place. The game regulations came out in 1975. One of the driving things in the game regulations was built on 3 pillars. I hope I can remember the 3 pillars. This will be interesting, won't it? Right? One was fair chase. One was the conservation of that resource, and that included native birds as well, right? The third pillar, what did I do? Conservation. Animal welfare. Do not forget animal welfare. It is a very important aspect in deer hunting, right? We had a major influence. I was involved in the trapping and the relocation of hog deer from Snake Island onto the mainland. And so were a lot of other people. A very important thing on this, right? That was driven by hunters that could see these deer were in problem on the mainland. It was done with the support of the government and the backing of the government. It was run by the Fisheries and Wildlife Council under the guidance of the then Minister's advisory panel. But the majority of the labour in that were volunteers. All those volunteers came from hunting organisations. And this is one of the strengths of members in organisations. They can be called on to help and work on projects like this. We have a long history of contribution. It goes back to the point where we had deer hunters actually driving the first research done on deer in Australia. The ADA had a project called Sambar Who Cares. They collected field data to try and improve our knowledge on this. They employed a biologist to work on wild deer in Australia. No one else was doing this. It was being driven by hunters. Knowledge is the key. It is the absolute key to where we're going and how we view deer. So where we go with this, this was one of the things that got me into some other things over the 55 years. And one thing was to write the book, which you brought, Barry, which he's going to hold up in the camera. But this isn't a plug. This isn't a plug because you can't buy them anymore. It's out of print and it will probably never be reprinted. But hunters have a wonderful story, right? Hunting's...
So this is very valuable. I'm sitting on a gold mine here, am I?
Oh, I don't think so.
No.
Get him to sign it.
I'm checking Marketplace.
I would
like
to think it was a gold mine. I recently saw what the last few copies they wanted to sell them for, and I had to have a serious discussion with them and tell them they weren't worth that. Knowledge is one of the keys, right? It's the key to everything, to understanding things. And it's one of the things that encouraged me to write a book. So many hunters have so much knowledge. They have stories, right? But they're not just stories. They're experiences in the bush, in the wild. It also led me on to writing magazine articles. And to this date, I know it's well in excess of 70 articles written about deer and deer hunting in various publications. It's also one of the things that drew me to creating some YouTube clips, which have gone fairly well, but they're based on knowledge, right? Things like how to identify Sambar deer sign, for instance, and be able to read the sign.
We'll put up a link to them in the show notes.
That'd be good. Thank you.
Standing there cooking the other Sunday night, watching them in the kitchen while I was making my risotto. They're great.
There you go. And that's going to be interesting.
Risotto.
Man of the world.
in a little bit, we're going to actually have a look at a video that the Invasive Species Council has put up, so we can then look at deer sign and what is actually deer sign, because it's really important.
And this knowledge is one of the things that drew Arthur Bentley and a few other people, Mike Harrison included, and Jeff Moore, into creating what was called the Australian Deer Research Foundation, which I was on the board from. And that was an organisation that was set up to raise funds, primarily through the sale of books, by the way, that was then used to foster deer research work. And actually, they spent a fair bit of money on sponsoring university students doing research on Sambar deer, which then led to the establishment of the Bunyip Sambar Deer Study Pen, which Mike managed. And all this was brought on from when Max Down, an internationally renowned biologist actually, was employed by ADA to work on the matters relating to deer. He said, we need to know more about this species. We need a study pen that replicates the wild situation. So we built that. But when we talk about that's a long history that I've been involved with things. As I said, a lot of things don't change. The challenges are still the same. The politics are still the same. It's just different people we're dealing with. And also, the need for knowledge doesn't change. All right? It's still there. But along the way, I've had some, what I consider were some good personal achievements. One of them was that when we had the biologist working on deer, Max Downs, he got me to do the field work on the identification of food plants that were utilised by Sambar deer. Now, the key to this is the first time in Australia where we had tried to identify, or anyone had tried to identify and document the dietary requirements of Sambar deer, how they used the vegetation in the bush, right? We didn't look at impact, but what was important was to understand what they ate. Now, there hasn't been a lot of work done on this, but again, this was hunters driving the research and looking for the knowledge to make rational decisions. The other thing was my involvement in hunter education. I've been heavily involved in that now for over 40 years, right? And again, it's driven by a thirst for knowledge. New hunters need knowledge. They need good information, and unfortunately, a lot of the information isn't good, and I will say this without reservation, right? There's a mixture of fact, speculation, and just plain bull. There's another word that goes with bull, but we'll leave it off, right? But that's what it is,
Yes,
right? And that's one of the biggest challenges for new hunters, right? Finding information, right? Don't take people's word for it. This is the advice I have. Do not take people's word for this is true. Verify it for yourself, right?
Which goes to hunters and people who oppose. It's probably a good segue to look at the misinformation about deer and the misidentification of deer sign. And we see it a lot from people who are trying to speak about deer damage. So I'll play a bit of a video and we can talk about.
Hey everyone, I'm out here in the Dandenong Ranges to Melbourne's east. This really ought to be a beautiful temperate rainforest gully with a stream running through it. But the sad reality is it's been absolutely trashed by deer. You can see here a really classic example of a wallow. And what'll be happening here is the deer are coming down in warmer weather, rolling around in here in order to keep cool. Not only are we seeing increasing impacts on landowners and farmers from deer, not only are we seeing the general trashing of our forests, not only are these animals becoming an increasing menace on our roads, but we're putting at risk the quality of our drinking water and the quality of our way of life. It just highlights the absurd situation that we have in this state where we protect these animals. And this is the price that we pay.
I suppose the big question on watching that video is where to begin. But the point here is this is a group that calls itself the Invasive Species Council. They've recently come out in some sort of unholy alliance with Environment Victoria and the Victorian Farmers Federation, pushing for deer to be declared a pest. And the premise behind this is that because deer are called game, they're damaging the environment and can't be stopped because of what they're called. But that video, and let's go through it bit by bit, so many falsehoods in there, so much misinformation or complete ignorance from people who are presenting and probably accepted by the public uncritically as experts, which was, to your point, Peter, about sourcing information and the big challenge sourcing information to Sambar wallow to keep cool.
No, it's
Oh, no, that's what he said.
Yeah, but I don't know where he got his information from. Deer do not wallow to keep cool. So that was basically incorrect.
And you go further than that. That forest structure, it should be a cool temperate rainforest.
Well, it's in the Dandenongs. He's made no reference to the historical logging that occurred through all of that country and the farmland that's all been cleared throughout all of that country as well.
Farmland that's about 50 metres behind his back there that's been completely cleared, yeah.
Regarding the water damage and things like that, it's very simple to put a photograph up and claim that. But I can actually show you a photograph. There was stuff I was collecting that I've got at home, and it's a photograph that I can show people and say this is damaged by deer. And what it is foot traffic in a state park by people where they have churned it up and it looks just like a deer wire. So we've got to be realistic about, what is impact? Everything has an impact, but what's degrading impact? And the thing was to claim, we're in a temperate forest. He wasn't in an unaltered forest, right? And forests are transitional. They're not static, right? We'll get onto that later. I've got a fair bit to say about that.
The water quality ones, the video they showed was a Sambar going through a clearly flooded river.
Looks a lot like the Yarra River.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't the Sambar that made that water brown.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, but you show a picture of a wallow and then you extrapolate that out and say that's causing that sort of impact on the river.
The rub, was that a Sambar rub in that video?
Well, I've seen so many photographs of what are claimed to be deer rubs that are clearly not. And there's some classic stuff in recent document that I read from New South Wales where they were looking at endangered plant species in an area and they claimed it to be a deer rub that had damaged the tree. Well, it wasn't. The tree was covered in foliage. The tree was covered in lichen. How did the deer break the branches without rubbing the foliage off, without rubbing all the lichen?
You've got an example of that photo, haven't you?
Yes, I do have an
We'll put
example.
it into the podcast.
Yeah.
And deer do rub trees. There's no doubt about that. But what they've shown there, that is not a deer rub on that tree. I'll guarantee it. We've got 4 people in here who've done a lot of deer hunting, and that is not a deer rub. So
it really begs the question, is this bloke being deliberately dishonest or ignorantly dishonest?
Well, either way, it doesn't reflect particularly well on their expertise and knowledge, does it?
I think it's a bit of both. I think some of it's so obvious that I think it's a bit of both. He has a position and he will make statements to support that position, whether he believes they're true or false.
Yeah, which I find to be intellectually dishonest. I mean, if nothing else. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, we do know deer have impacts. They can rub trees, they can make wallows, they can do all of these things. But that doesn't mean they're doing it in every situation, and it doesn't mean it's actually creating significant impacts in a whole heap of others. So to draw that out, and in every situation where there's a wallow, to claim that's degrading the landscape, it's affecting biodiversity, it's just simply wrong. And then we get on to the comments about deer are protected, so that stops control, and that's just demonstrably false. I mean, deer are unprotected on private property. Basically, the only limitations, which comes back to animal welfare, is the calibre of firearm that you have to use. So farmers, they don't need to have a game licence. They can shoot deer themselves. They can have an agent in, they can have a rec hunter in, they can do any of those sort of things. It's important too that we remember.
Well, wait a minute, David. The Victorian Farmers Federation are holding hands and skipping down the street with these alarmists, so it must be a problem.
Not just the Farmers Federation.
The VFF called for reform, I think it was about 13 years ago, and that's when deer were actually unprotected on private property. So the VFF at that stage got what they want. I'm not sure what's changed in this time. I think it seems to be that they seem to think there's going to be magical funding appear from somewhere.
The golden bullet, David.
And look, I go to a lot of land care meetings and community meetings and that on deer, and people talk about damage and things like this. And there are tools that can be used, and we talk about that and what they can actually do. But the reality seems to be that most people want a magic solution. They want to click their fingers and they want the problem to go away. And these sort of groups, the Invasive Species Council and the Victorian National Parks Association, seem to think that
and the Victorian Farmers Federation who are holding hands and skipping down the street with them.
If we give them a whole heap of money, they're going to solve the problem. But they highlight all these issues, but they've got no solutions. And that's the other thing. The reality is deer are here to stay. Regardless of what you want to call them, regardless of what they want to say, they are here to stay. We need to deal with the reality. And yes, they can have negative impacts. They also have a lot of positive impacts, economic impacts, the welfare of hunting, providing food and the opportunity for hunters for the hungry. So there's enormous potential there.
Surely if we turn them into a pest, the Monbolt Creek would become a savanna.
Is that the magic bullet?
Well, explain to me, and this is what I want these people to do because they're making those claims. Explain to me how that is going to happen.
Well, it seems their goal at the moment is to have them removed from the game list.
So it's not to improve biodiversity.
No, it won't make any difference to that. But I think some very smart person who I have a lot of respect and a lot of time for explained to me that maybe calling them names will solve the problem. I think that might have been you, Barry. I don't know.
Well, we know that it's not going to, and we need to be pragmatic about this. And yes, we know that deer can have impacts, which is why we're involved in control programs, and we don't shy away from that.
We've all been involved. Everyone on this table's been involved in control programs, and we all support control programs. But calling them names isn't going to solve the problem.
And well, there was an article recently in Stock and Land about some illegal behaviour and this idea that declaring deer a pest would somehow prevent illegal behaviour. The reality is that at the moment, because of the game status of deer, we've got the Game Management Authority involved, which will soon be Outdoor Rec Victoria. So we've actually got an extra level of enforcement. We've got extra penalties involved for people who do the wrong thing related to that. So I don't see how calling them feral or calling them a pest or doing anything like that is actually going to do any good.
Well, the powers of authorised officers under the Wildlife Act, which is what these people are calling for deer to be removed from, far outweigh the general powers of police in a lot of regards, things like warrantless searches and all of that sort of stuff. Coppers can only dream of that.
We can go back. We can go back to Peter's point earlier with the Deer Advisory Council, which I think was 1975. And what were the three things? Animal welfare, fair chase, and conservation. Well, you can throw at least a couple of those out of the window if deer are removed from the Wildlife Act. Fair chase certainly goes out the window, and animal welfare is not even thought about. When was the last time you heard a discussion about animal welfare in fox hunting or rabbit shooting or any of those things? It doesn't exist anymore. So one thing that Wildlife Act does is ensure that these things are in place to make sure they are.
And so much of this discussion, and from the other side in particular, it's not binary. I mean, deer aren't always good and they're not always bad. It's trying to simplify it and dumb down the discussion to that level. Does everybody a disservice, and it's not going to deal with what the issues are. I mean, any management program, what are you trying to do? You're trying to minimise sort of negative impacts, and you're trying to maximise the positive outcomes. And there are some real positives that can come out of deer in this state. And as I say, they are here to stay. So let's accept that reality, which these people don't seem to want to do. So they're here. We need to manage them. We need to maximise the positive benefits of them being here. We need to minimise the negative outcomes and get on with life.
I think people that are opposed to deer, I think their goal and their objective is the eradication of deer, and it's not going to happen. It's going to happen about as much as eradicating rabbits or foxes or some other introduced species. It's purely not going to happen. They're here to stay. So how do we manage that, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah. And as I say, that's a lot of the meetings I go to. That's the sort of the outcome people want. They want somebody to click their fingers and the problem has gone away.
Even control programs that I work on, and I work on a bunch of them. Some of those, the goal is eradication. It's just like, well, let's change the goal because that ain't happening.
And a lot of it is really ideological, and certainly deer hunters have taken an ideological approach to deer. When I started out deer hunting, I'd say the approach to deer was largely ideological in the past, 30-odd years ago. But a lot of these approaches are ideological, and it's people who can't get their head around or can't accept that we like them. You're not allowed to like them.
Oh, this is an interesting thing that you bring up, like them, because it was described as me as a double-edged sword. If they didn't get you on the upstroke, they got you on the downstroke, right? Because we were continually challenged by animal welfare groups, and also I had to go to meetings at government level to do with animal welfare and hunting, and the belief was that we hunted deer, we killed deer because we hated them. They couldn't, and it was
it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it was one of the things where the concept was, well, how can you like them if you kill them, right? Look at all the indigenous societies in the world, right? They have hunted, they have killed, right? Because that was part of their life, but they respected the wildlife. Now, one of the big things here that I see is people want deer declared as pests. There's no question. There's organisations want them declared as pests. The minute they're made a pest, you lose the most important thing, respect.
Yep, out the window.
Then if it's a pest, there are no rules. Now, people might think they're successful if they get the label pest, but then there's no rules. Where's the rules to control hunting? How do you charge someone for a deer hunting licence, which gives authorities control over the hunters, their behaviour, right? All these things, right? How do you justify charging a licence fee to support the structures we have in place when they're a pest? The other thing with pest is, right, if you have pest species on your property, right, you're obliged to control that pest species. You don't have a say in it, right?
Which
you're obliged.
I don't think the VFF has really thought through that whole thing.
In South Australia, the policy in South Australia that is in place and actively hunting is the total eradication of deer. Now, their definition of total eradication is when we're down to an estimated population of 1,000 animals, we will consider they are eradicated. It is then up to property owners to control any deer they have or eradicate them. They are on-shifting the cost to property owners because they've declared them a pest to be eradicated. So that's one of the dangers that farmers face in Victoria. They will have a legal obligation, like it or not, for the removal of all deer if they're declared a pest.
It's a pretty big fence they're going to have to build.
Pretty big pockets with the dollars they're going to have too.
Fence the entire state.
Which I don't know if it's a neat segue, but it leads us on to another one of these misnomers, certainly a very contested figure is there's 1 million deer in Victoria. We've got to do something about deer. Now, that bores my piss a bit because it misses...
Does what?
It bores my piss a bit because it misses the point. Every time people talk about deer being a problem and there's 1 million deer, and this is what it does when it pushes policy is it means that deer are never going to be properly managed in this state. When you've got this mindset that every deer everywhere is a problem, it actually impedes government from spending money on the areas where deer are a problem and where that money should be really focused and targeted towards dealing with the deer that are a problem. And the issue is never the gross number of deer. 1 million deer in Victoria, which we'll get to, the number's probably wildly incorrect. It doesn't matter. What matters is the impacts. What matters is what the deer in the area that are having the impacts are doing, not necessarily how many of them there are. I mean, that plays into the impacts, but this whole idea that there's 1 million deer.
And we know that over the decades that deer, most people had no idea there was deer in Victoria. And because
most people still have no idea there's deer. Let's be brutally honest.
Yeah. So the impacts weren't there. And obviously the population densities were low enough that they were spread throughout the landscape and they weren't having an impact. So obviously populations having increased. Any hunter who gets out there will acknowledge that. Certainly there's more deer around than there were. But once again, they're not spread evenly through the landscape. And we've got 4 different species in Victoria, which sort of gets lost in some of this stuff as well. They all have different impacts. Fallow deer in numbers have increased significantly. And they're having a big impact in some of these peri-urban areas in particular because they're a herd animal, so they're congregated together, so they do have a bigger impact potentially in some of those areas. So we do need to manage them, but we do know that at appropriate population densities, they don't have those negative impacts. And this is where the research comes in we're talking about. We need to understand what those sort of population densities in particular sort of environments are. And there probably are some where you do want 0 deer. Some of those littoral rainforests, there has been significant damage. And I mean, this is the difference. I mean,
we're understanding that deer damage relationship.
Absolutely.
Showing a stringy bark that's been ripped up by a wombat or a wallaby and calling it deer damage and using that as an impetus to remove deer is not a smart use of a finite government resource.
Now, as far as the 1 million deer is concerned, that must be where they got the number.
It's a sexy number. It's a scary number.
Well, you've walked every gully in Victoria and counted them, haven't you, Pete?
Certainly I haven't, not. Right. But one of the things on this is that at least we had Deaker look at this and say, well, hang on, we need to know how many deer they are. And then subsequently, they had the Arthur Rylah Institute, the CSIRO Arthur Rylah Institute, look into this. Now, to date, that is the best system that's in place, right? And it's interesting there that I do have some concerns about this. And several of the concerns, you're going to have to put up with 5 concerns.
Here's a concern, all right?
Right.
Do you want me to keep count of them?
Now, I've read the report several times. I've spoken to a couple of the field officers who I accidentally came across one day. And being a sticky nose, I like to know what people are doing in the bush. So I found out. But one of the things is that cameras are only in place for a short period of time, right? They're not in place over a continual period. They're not in place for several years. They're in place for a couple of months, right? This only gives a snapshot. Deer do not use the environment the same way every season of the year. So summer's different than autumn. Winter's different than autumn, and spring's different again. They use the environment. Now, we'll talk about Sambar because that's the one I know the best. The way they use the environment changes over the years, right? And as well as the seasons, because it changes over the years, because situations change in the years. Droughts, the deer use the environment differently in droughts. Good seasons, they use it differently. When we have those terrific springs and those good summer rains, right, the whole way Sambar behaves changes, right? We have that drought here, it's completely different, right? So where this is leading me to is that this is really open to misinterpretation, right? Because if we start to look at the results from the camera trap and the number of deer is counting walking past, it might simply be different because of a seasonal change, not because there's more numbers or there's less numbers. And it's very easy for this number that the CIRO are coming up with. This is a continual thing they're doing, right? It's very easy for that number to get hijacked and people to start to claim, look, the numbers are increasing or the numbers are reducing. This is where we need to understand the actual animal. And as David said, there's 4 species here. They behave differently. They use the environment different, right? And another concern I have
there was a spatial study last year, was it, in New South Wales that had fallow Sambar and reds in it, and huge variance in their use of environment.
There's no question about it. And another thing is they have a very limited number of cameras. All eastern Victoria, right? I'll get the number wrong. I think it was 170 cameras, but there's under 200 cameras to monitor all of eastern Victoria, right? There needs to be more cameras. There needs to be more funding. This needs to be an ongoing research program. I had a trail camera. I never moved for 5 years, and it wasn't there looking for big stags. It was there watching how deer were using a single scrape, right? And the way deer move through the area. The variation over that 5 years and the seasonal variation is staggering, right? So I'm concerned here that using a camera over a short period can have biased results and bias and bias interpretation, right? Now, having said all this is the best system we have in Victoria for monitoring deer and trying is the word, to estimate the population. And the CSIRO and the Arthur Eiler Institute should be congratulated on what they're doing, right? And one of the things that's really stood out in this study to me is they're actually doing the work, right? They're not writing papers based on requoting what someone else has written without verifying. They are on the ground, they are doing the work, they're making rational decisions, very complex mathematical decisions based on their results, right? Other people are estimating deer numbers. What? Because they've got a map that shows how I love this one. They've got a map where you put your sightings down. Oh, sorry, this big thing here gets in the way of my hands, but we won't worry about that, right? They've got a map, right, that shows deer numbers are increasing because the deer sightings are increasing.
There wouldn't be more people reporting more often.
Oh, no one thought of that one, did they?
There's no bias there whatsoever.
I think I fully agree with that, your concerns about the ARI study. But I think over time, and as they start to account for those sort of things and that they haven't got that many cameras, that at least that's scientifically based. So we've got on one hand, there's at least 1 million deer with no basis. ARI estimate for 2023 was 191,153 deer on public land. Bit of a difference there. So, and I don't know whether that's right or not. As we say, we've got some concerns with the methodology, and I think it needs to be improved over time. But this is scientifically sort of based instead of plucking a finger out. It's a huge difference. And I know where I'd be putting my money to be closer to the actual
the
truth.
new cane toad.
Well, estimating the new rabbit plague was the other thing that quoted federally.
Seriously, this is another thing that gets thrown, and they're rabbits and they're all these other things. And it's important to remember that deer only have one offspring per year. So they're not growing at that exponential rate that people claim. Look, to be perfectly fair, Sambar and hog deer could theoretically have 3 offspring in 2 years with their gestation periods, but the reality of that is, and that's the simple thing, and this is sort of the numbers that these invasive species council and that like to throw out. The reality is deer will only get pregnant when they're on a rising plane of nutrition and they've reached critical body mass. So as deer numbers increase in a particular area, the resources available to them, what they can eat, declines, so they're not going to reproduce at such a high rate. But let's not let the facts get in the way.
And the calf survival rate plays into those same conditions too.
But this is the thing. This is really nuanced. This is complicated.
Yeah,
it's not headlines and saying, hey, let's draw a graph like this that sort of shows this exponential growth without any predation, without any mortality. It's
estimating wildlife populations is a difficult thing to do, regardless of entering the hunt, adding hunting to it or not. So
we do it on Sunday Island, and it's a very closed system, and it's still an estimate, right?
Yeah, of course, it's always going to be an estimate.
But I think that's, talking about Sunday Island, I think that's a perfect example of what can be done when we manage deer populations to benefit everything. So it's been run for 60 years, that place, to manage the island for the hog deer. The benefit is the environment is managed for all the other native species that are there. We've got a sustainable herd of hog deer. It provides great hunting opportunities and member benefits. And it shows that deer can be managed, and it's not rocket science. It requires some work, but it requires some honesty, and it means we need to be basing decisions on facts, not sort of inflated figures and sort of rubbish rhetoric.
Well, we've had government land managers over there in recent years commenting on the condition of the island and the lack of weeds and what good condition and how biodiverse the island is.
Because hunters are putting their time, effort and money into maintaining that environment. And as I say, it has the hog deer are there, but it has spin-off benefits for all the other wildlife. Habitat is key. So we need to maintain that. And that's a really good case study.
When we look at the numbers, right, and I often get asked this about the numbers of deer and things, right, and have the numbers changed in recent years? And the answer is yes and no, right? And numbers change because of natural fluctuations, right? And there's 3 things, apart from natural mortality, which all living creatures are going to meet one day. There's 3 things that change those numbers, right? Hunting, where it's legal, it reduces the natural increase. There's no question about this. You often hear the claim, hunting's not, solving the problem. It can't solve the problem for the simple reason you can't hunt everywhere. So therefore management has to get involved, right? So one of the things about this, I'll go into that in a bit more detail later. And the other thing is management. And David just mentioned it. A good management program actually has benefits to the environment and to the deer and to hunting, right? But it can't happen. Good management can't happen if the focus is just on eradication and not understanding how things are happening. The third thing that affects deer numbers is seasonal changes, but and disturbance. And the biggest disturbance that we have in the bush, as far as Sambar is concerned now, is wildfire.
Yeah, certainly now that logging's been taken out of the equation.
So what actually happened with logging is it has the same results as a fire, right? And where we have our property, it's heavily hunted, and we have to bear this in mind, because that does affect the numbers, right? Now, pre-fire, the deer population and the plant communities were basically stable. It wasn't changing much, right? Now, post-fire, right, we know what happens in a big wildfire, right? So the vegetation, right, it's just people say the bush is destroyed. It's not destroyed when we have a fire. It's going through a phase. It's basically rebirth is what it is. But, right, post-fire, what happens after a fire, we get a flush of vegetation. That vegetation fights back even if there's no rain. It starts to grow and things like that. Right, so when we've had the fire, we've had the bush, what people say is devastated. We've had dramatic decrease in deer numbers just through the mortality by the fire. But after that fire, things change and the vegetation's going through a transitional process. We get species that appear that are fire-induced, right? Now, they'll be short-lived. Things like dogwood, blackwood and silver wattles, they just go crazy, right? And we get this huge plant community just coming back. It's ideal conditions for all herbivores, right? Not just for deer. Everything that depends on those plants in the forest, it's ideal conditions. Their population will naturally increase. David mentioned about when that nutrition level's going up, the pregnancy rates and birds, everything, it goes up, right? Then it's the golden time. It's the golden time for deer, the post-fire, right? So when we're starting to look at the effect of fire, and when we look at post-fire situations in the bush, at about 8 years, now that's pretty flexible, the 8 years, but we're starting to see a decline in deer numbers. We're starting to see the forest go through a more transitional period. We're seeing things like the fire-induced scrub, it starts to die off. This is a natural thing. The forest naturally evolves, continues to evolve till we end up with what we call a climax forest. Now, one of the things that's happening here is we're seeing this change in vegetation. It's just so easy to look at that change in vegetation. So the deer have done this, and we're seeing this today, right? We're seeing this. The deer haven't done it. The vegetation, the forest is a living, evolving thing. It's changing, right? And its change is then influencing the mortality, the breeding, everything to do with all living creatures in that forest, right? Post-fire's 20 years. Now, where our property is, we're in the 20-year stage, right? There's been a dramatic change, right, in the forest, right? The vegetation's thinned right out. Recreational and illegal hunting too, I may add, activity is high. The deer numbers have reduced, right? There's no question about it. Those numbers have come down. And this is going to happen no matter what. It's going to go up. It's going to come down, even if there's no hunting there, right? The deer depend on the forest. When they're out of harmony with the forest, their population crashes, just like all animals, right? And I know this. We would, like, if we go back to that 8-year period, we would drive up the bush and we would see deer running across the road, right? I'll take the four people in our little group that hunt, right? We would arrive at my place and we would say, how many deer did you see, Barry? Oh, I only saw 4, 5, whatever, you know. How many did you see, Daryl? Oh, I saw 2. Oh, how many did you see? Everyone saw deer. Now we get up at the hut. Anyone see one? No, I didn't see one. Oh, I saw one. Where'd you see that? Oh, back down by Hayfield. Right, so, you know, this isn't science. This is just observation, right? So we see these things happen. What we have to understand is the deer numbers are never static. They never will be. They will fluctuate. They will go up. and they will go down. To say they're continually going, oh, look out, I hit the microphone. To say they're going to continually increase, right? It's fantasy.
Yeah, once it exceeds carrying capacity, the population is going to plateau and then drop.
Yeah. One of the areas that we have got a significant problem with deer numbers in the peri-urban areas, and SSAA is involved in control programs with Parks Victoria there. Maybe, Daryl, you can talk about some of the challenges of doing that, because these are areas that aren't open to recreational hunting. There's usually a variety of land tenures, a lot of sort of smaller properties. So that's where we do have some real challenges.
Yeah, look, it's really difficult. So anywhere there's a waterway, you're going to get deer. And we're talking, right up to sort of Kew. Certainly Heidelberg as far as Manningham Road. There's a control program about to start that runs between Heidelberg and Warrandyte. And I can tell you now, the local community is up in arms because there's deer in Victoria. And when I said before, the average person doesn't know there's deer in Victoria. They might have heard someone deer hunting once, but they don't know there's deer in their backyard. Where we are here in Richmond, we could walk and find a deer probably. Richmond, where are we? Collingwood. We go down the river, we turn left and walk a few k's and you're going to find deer. And yeah, to control those is a real issue. They're stuck in little
because
pockets.
they're called game and not pests. Is that why it's a real issue?
I don't see how it's going to make a lot of difference. No? They don't seem to have. They don't seem to know the difference. They don't seem to distinguish the difference. But yeah, really hard to control those numbers. And then when you look at where you can control them, so probably once you get to Heidelberg there onwards, it's near impossible. But trying to control things sort of from that 20k sort of radius outside of Melbourne, it's the land tenure. There's golf courses, there's Parks Victoria waterways, there's obviously parks, there's some Peri-urban farmland and vegetable gardens and orchards and all sorts of things that come in play. And yeah, it becomes a really complex operation to try and control them across the land tenure.
So it's complex and challenging, but the game status has no impact
zero.
on that.
So as you said, I manage a bunch of deer control programs, and the game status, there's an uncontrolled unprotection order. So whether it's public land or private land, if you want to control them, you can control them.
And just because we're seeing increased deer populations in those areas does not extrapolate out. So that's what's happening across the state and in areas that are open to recreational hunting, because that's another thing that we get regularly, that they claim recreational hunting is not the solution to the problem. Well,
because there was a deer in Warrandyte.
Yeah, there's 3 deer in my backyard, therefore there's 3 deer in everyone's backyard.
And we're quite upfront, but recreational hunting is not going to solve all of our deer issues, particularly in those sort of areas.
And it's not our motivation, mind you.
But it's a big part of the overall management of our deer populations in Victoria.
It has to be. No matter how big the population is, and whether it's 200 or 400 or 500, whatever it is, I'm pretty sure it's not 1 million. Peter might argue with me, he thinks there's 1 million. But I don't think any of us agree there's 1 million deer. But what we do know is the harvest data. And we look at the harvest data, this is robust data. It's robust science. So we're harvesting 150,000 plus using 50,000 hunters. No matter what the number is, that has to be having an effect. And for people to tell me it has no effect, it's like, well, it has to.
Up around Peter's place, as you said earlier, is a great example. I've stalked in the forest around there, as Dave has, and you do all the time. It gets hunted hard, and it's not filthy with deer.
Oh, no. It's actually now become quite challenging. It's challenging country for hunters just because of the population.
And hunting is well and truly keeping a downward pressure on the numbers of deer there. Hound crew is working there, spotlighters working there, stalkers working there. It's keeping downward pressure on those deer. Of course it's having an impact. Can we measure it against the mythical 1 million? No, but of course it's having an impact.
And that's where we talk about the nuance of this. I mean, to manage deer, there's a whole heap of tools that we need to use, and rec hunting isn't going to be appropriate in these peri-urban areas and things like that. So we need to look at other things. So, I mean, the organisation's not opposed to aerial culling per se, if there's good reasons to actually be doing it. And it's interesting what Peter was saying about sort of post-fire, and you get that complete eruption of new plant species. And some of the justification for aerial culling in those areas is because they're protecting biodiversity. But if we've got this huge eruption of plants that's going to happen anyway, and then a lot of those are just going to die off as the forest regenerates, is that money well spent? Or do we start looking and saying, okay, well, acknowledge deer are here to stay, and do we start sort of prioritising particular high value assets and start putting the money into protecting those, and get away from this whole thing that, oh, gee, deer are a pest and we need to call them.
I think you know the answer.
I know the answer. I'm just putting it out there.
Why we're doing aerial culling after fires.
Are you proposing a strategic approach to the management of deer in Victoria?
What a novel idea. In fact, we actually were promised that under the Sustainable Hunting Action Plan, and we ended up with a deer control strategy. And look, control is a part of an overall management strategy, but it's 100%. Not a management strategy on its own. And I think
that's why it's failed.
That.
And that's why it's failed, because it's predicated on this all deer everywhere are a problem, and everybody everywhere is trying to get their paws on this tiny little bit of funding.
Oh, hang on. There's money involved?
There's money involved. And there was $20 million odd, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money when it's spread between everyone everywhere, instead of, like David said, picking the high-value assets that need protection and doing what's needed to protect them. And it might not come with a sexy headline that we killed, X amount of deer per hour.
Which you'd never know because the data's secret.
The data, yeah. So there's that problem. But back to it doesn't matter. What's the deer damage relationship? How many deer did we have to remove in order to protect that high-value asset should be the question. It doesn't make good headlines. It doesn't make good propaganda. Old mate from the Invasive Species Council can't make good sexy videos about it. But if we're serious about protecting biodiversity and having that as part of the conversation about deer, that's what we need to be doing.
So let's be serious. No one's controlling deer from helicopters after fires for biodiversity. I might say that, and it might be written in the paper and the research, but we're controlling deer after bushfires because that's when you can shoot the deer at a helicopter. That's when you get the highest number of deer per hour. It's the most cost-effective way. And look, it's about money. You hit the nail on the head. It's about the dollars. It's not about biodiversity when you're controlling deer from helicopters after fires. Let's be, put it on the table.
I don't disagree.
As much as I love the biodiversity argument, that's not what it's about.
I think a lot of this is it's when we look at the impact of deer, right? We put this in perspective really, and they're claiming all this impact by deer when it's never been measured.
No, right? It's not quantified.
It isn't like what's the dietary overlap, right? If they're competing with other herbivores, where is the dietary overlap, right? Now, there was a project a long time ago, actually, in the United States, on an island called St. Vincent's Island off Florida. They had sambar deer introduced, and they had white-tailed deer. And the concept was that we have to remove the sambar deer. They don't belong there. So, but someone come up, they had a bright idea, actually. Someone come up, well, why don't we see what the real issues are here environmentally and whether they're competing with the whitetail, right? So the university got involved over there, and we're not talking students here. We're talking the research department got involved, like people with a serious background in understanding wildlife management. They got involved. They studied the sambar. They said, yes, there is a dietary overlap, and they could record all this. Right? But it's insignificant. It's like when we talk about I nearly said a rude word, but it's to do with the bodily function that we just watched here. It's like that, right? They're affecting the water quality. For goodness sake. Melbourne Water have been studying whether deer are impacting the water quality, right? The big concern, are they spreading disease? They're spreading all these supposedly nasty things through Melbourne's drinking water. Melbourne University do a study. The impact's insignificant, right? When we talk about impact, it's just so easy to say, oh, they have an impact because they're there and because they're non-native, right? The other thing there is every living single organism. Oh, not organism. That sounded a bit rude.
That was Freudian.
Well, you know how my wife works now. Every single
we're talking about organisms,
organism, right, right? Every single organism on this planet, right? Birds, fish, bacteria, the list goes on. Everything has an impact, right? There is nothing that does not have an impact or an influence on changing the natural world. Now, look out. I'm going to say it, but I'm very sorry about this one, that I'm going to bring it up, right? People who hate deer and are labelling the worst invasive species that Australia has, they need a mirror. They need to stand in front of it and understand that the biggest invasive, the most significant invasive species on this planet are us. For goodness sake, nothing has changed this planet. Nothing has changed it in such a short period as people. And we need to sort of really look at the true issues here.
Well, I think there's some really complex environmental issues going on.
Without a question.
And I think it's a lot easier to have a scapegoat, or in this case, a scape deer, rather than look at some of those things. So if we can put all the problems onto deer and denigrate them and say this is the cause of all evil, then for a lot of people that sort of absolves them of having to do anything themselves. So you're absolutely spot on there, Dirk.
I can't tell you how many times I've looked at deer problems. Now I'm bashing the microphone, thanks, Peter. Many times I've gone to look at a deer problem. I've gone and done a survey or used cameras or just done a thermal survey at night. You get out of the vehicle, you turn the thermal on, you do a quick scan of the paddock, and there's 250 or 300 kangaroos, and there's 2 fallow deer 900 metres away. I can tell you now, though, Parks Victoria or the land manager, if it's not Parks Victoria, will tell you that the deer are causing the damage. So, well, would it be the 250 kangaroos grazing, or is it going to be the 2 fallow deer?
No, we've talked about this, Daryl, and this once again, this is complicated and nuanced, but this whole simplifying it down that introduced, got to be bad, native, got to be good, couldn't possibly be bad.
You're not going to make me talk about Wilson's prom, are you?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Wilson's prom.
We're not going to that one.
It's the classic example. The introduced deer are bad, but the introduced kangaroos and wombats are good. It's absurd.
Overabundance of any species is going to be an issue. Well, it's going to be a problem.
Sort of comes down to wildlife management and look at the big picture.
The other thing when we talk about this intellectual dishonesty is the hyped biosecurity threats. So we have to control deer because they're going to poison us all, you know.
Well, the one that gets touted out, this great fear, is foot and mouth disease, which hasn't been in this country since, I think, the 1860s or something. So it hasn't been here a long time, but areas where they actually have dealt with foot and mouth in the UK, deer have not been an issue in that. And yes, deer can catch foot and mouth. That's quite true. But in the UK, they have not recorded any cases of wild deer having foot and mouth, and they certainly haven't been involved in spreading it. And I think I've got some stuff out of England here and Wales Best Practice Guide, and it talks about foot and mouth in deer. There has not been a confirmed case of foot and mouth disease in wild deer in the UK, and deer are not thought to have been important in its transmission in the outbreaks in this country in the last 50 years. They have been shown to catch it in experimental situations in the past.
And we go again to farmer lobbyists pushing this FMD claim. Outside of sub-Saharan Africa, every FMD outbreak has been managed by managing domestic livestock.
Nuts.
And if you want to raise the spectre of FMD, if FMD gets into this country, it'll have a massive impact on farm. You won't be able to move domestic livestock.
No.
It won't be deer that are causing it. And scapegoating deer, again, would be an obscene thing to do. And it would be an obscene thing to do because it would make us fail to deal with what the actual issue would be. It would make our response less effective if we're going to spend money trying to scapegoat something. Even if it was the deer transmitting it, good luck doing something about it. Deal with the real issue if you're going to talk about stuff like FMD.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, the restrictions that they've had in the UK where they've actually had these outbreaks, they basically run zones. So a protection zone within 3 Ks of an outbreak and a surveillance zone 10 Ks around that, and the rest of it becomes a restricted area.
Basically, like how Ag Victoria very effectively dealt with the bird flu outbreak in Victoria last year.
I keep thinking about bird flu. So bird flu, the likelihood of being induced would come from wild populations, but the spread of it would be through domestic animals.
And they dealt with it really effectively by doing exactly that.
Foot and mouth is the same case. If foot and mouth gets in, it's not going to come in through a wild population because deer don't cross borders, international borders.
And I mean, their sort of solutions here are they basically – it's more people that are going to spread this. So they stop deer stalking in these areas, stop any movement of live deer, but they're also stopping the movement of livestock as well. Don't move carcasses and byproducts. They're not going out and trying to cull deer because all that's going to do is push them out of those particular areas. So wild deer, no impact. In areas where they've actually had these outbreaks, wild deer have not been an issue in any of it, and they've got no recorded cases of them catching it. Australian, if we're going to talk about what can be done in experimental circumstances, Australian native wildlife can actually catch foot and mouth and transmit it. There was a case in, and this was in a zoo, so they weren't deliberately trying to infect the animal. There was a kangaroo in a zoo in India, actually developed foot and mouth and died from it. So if we're going to start throwing
let's declare eastern grey kangaroos a pest, that'll fix it.
Well, declaring anything a pest isn't going to fix anything. I thought we'd work that out, but they can get it. So if we're going to go down this scaremongering thing about biosecurity and all the rest of it, well, let's have a look at everything that could be involved. And once again, let's just be realistic about this. I get passionate about some of this stuff.
Oh, really?
Wow. And that's why this sort of forum, and I mean,
you've been hanging out for the deer episode.
Not even ducks.
People have stuck with us over this length of time, and this is the thing. It is really nuanced and complicated.
I came here to hear from Peter.
Well, we can go back to Burke.
All right, let's go back to Peter.
Burke, what are you going to say?
There's no stress when I'm listening to this. Can I talk to camera? Go talk to camera. If you haven't done something like this, right, you ought to come and do this, and you'll work out what stress is. Words don't come out properly. All sorts of things.
Drop us an email. We're happy to host.
Where are we up to then?
Well, we're talking about the impacts that we probably should talk about hunting deer.
We're getting towards the end.
Which is
have we got time to talk about hunting deer?
Well, we should talk about hunting Sambar. I think whilst we've got the I won't use the L word.
No. You can use the L word, and then I can tell you what it really means.
Rob Fickling used the L word, and he's never lived it down.
He called me a legend.
He did.
In public.
He did.
So I looked up the word legend. It's a myth with no basis in fact.
That's a bit harsh.
While we're here, now Rob Fickling has a nickname. It's Scatman, because when he was a child, he used to collect animal scats. So if you ever go into his shop, right, just ask for Scatman. Right, now let's go back to deer hunting, right? And what is it, right? It's a magic world, right? Well, I was going to say if you haven't done it, but you've all done it. What a silly thing.
You're preaching to the converted here.
I'll look over here.
Want to learn about deer hunting?
Ben, if you haven't done it, what a magic word. Word. See, I told you, this is stressful. Words come out. So when we look at deer hunting, right, it's not just, to me, Sambar, it's not just the Sambar. It's a total package, right? It's the bush, the mountains, right? It's the rivers, it's the streams, right? It's just a totally experience, right? For those who haven't done it, right? You think you have a good time when you go in the bush and go camping. No, going with a purpose, right? And the purpose for me, it's the deer, right? I want to see, every day I get out of bed up there, I want to see the deer. And right, that's not driven by, I want to see lots more deer, like population. I don't want to see lots more like that. I'm happy the way it is. Hunting Sambar deer by fair chase means, right, without using drones, without using thermal imaging, without using spotlights, right, is the most challenging form of hunting in Australia when you hunt these animals fair chase. And it is just so important. The more you hunt them, the more respect you have for that animal. Their level of alertness surpasses any other deer, right? If you don't think it does, go out to the zoo, where if you've got a zoo anywhere that's got deer, go and watch the deer, right? Watch how Sambar behaves. It is totally alert. I did this in the Melbourne Zoo when they had the deer there in the centre of Melbourne. You go and you watch them, right? You watch the fallow deer, watch the red deer. They're just sitting around, they're lazing around like this, right? You watch the Sambar deer. A kid yells out, gate closes, and the Sambar deer go. They're like this. All the other deer just, I'm on holidays. You know, these Sambar are never on holidays. They are absolutely alert, and this is how do I explain it? Right? It's something I can't stop doing.
You're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, but it's something I can't stop doing, right? But there's so many ways to legally hunt Sambar deer, and when we talk about stalking Sambar, it's not that simple, right? When we used to say, stalking Sambar, everyone thought, stalking Sambar. But it's changed so much, right? There's so many different ways to go stalking, right? I'm a bush stalker. I hunt bush that is probably, I would recommend to people, probably a bit too thick where you should be hunting deer, right? But then you get into people now that the deer are in the high country. You get the people there where they want to backpack, they want to go into these areas. I hunt from the road. I'm old, right? I walk in the bush from a road, for goodness sake, right? Or from me hut. But you get people that backpacking experience, going in the wilderness, learning to navigate the wilderness. You get people there that are into glassing, looking for deer. You've got people that have developed into long-range shooting. And on that, I will say something. A lot of people are anti-long-range shooting. I am and I'm not. Because if you have the skill, right, and if you have the ability, if you put the practice in, it's a different form of hunting, right? If you've been watching YouTube, if you've been watching all these heroes whacking deer at long range, and you think you can go and do it, you're in fantasy land, right? Try and consistently hit the kill zone at 600 metres, right? It's not going to happen with the average hunter.
Well, the average hunter needs to try and consistently hit the kill zone at 50 metres.
Exactly.
It'd be a good start.
Yep. I think that's one area where deer hunters should strive to improve their personal skills. Shooting ability is all about anything. Do you know a cricket player that seriously plays cricket, doesn't practice? Do you know a football player that doesn't practice? You know a golfer who doesn't practice? It's, that's one big advance that every owner can do. And the other thing is to seek out that good knowledge, right? There's a lot of good hunters out there that can be good mentors for people. And some of the organisations, right, run excellent hunter education systems where people can get good information. So will we talk more about deer hunting, or will we move on to the...
Let's move on to where we're going, I think, and finish it out with...
The crystal ball.
Get the crystal ball out.
Where we're going.
No, I know where I'd like to see us going.
Well, we're going. We us four are going to the brewery soon to have lunch, but
that's what I thought we were talking about.
Cut that out, Ben.
No.
Well, look, I think in spite of Invasive Species Council and the Victorian National Parks Association and that ilk sort of promoting this pest sort of narrative and trying to undermine sort of the game status of deer. At the moment, government isn't accepting that, which is really good. It means they're actually looking at the facts of the matter and not being sucked into that. I suppose the risk that we face there is, as they continue to do all these sort of things, if public opinion starts to significantly change, then there will be political pressure on politicians to perhaps do sort of what's the popular thing rather than the right thing. So that's certainly a risk that we would face. And that's a big part of our jobs, to make sure that we continue to prosecute the case and talk about facts. We certainly want to be pushing for a deer management strategy. We were promised that under the SHAP. It wasn't delivered. So I'd certainly like to go back there. And
you're never going to let that go, are you?
I'm not going to.
You will let that go when we get a deer management
when we
strategy.
actually get it, and we should have it. And this is the thing, though. There's benefits for everything in that. You still can have your control programs. You've got the benefits of recreational hunting. You've got the economic benefits. You've got the welfare benefits for hunting. You're putting good food on people's tables. So certainly like to see a deer management strategy. What we really need to do is focus, because deer aren't good or bad. They're here to stay. So what we need to do is get realistic about it and say, okay, let's maximise the benefits and the positives of having them here, and let's minimise the negatives and actually get on with things. So I think that's the reality of where we want to go, and I think that's everybody can sort of get what they need out of that, rather than where we're going with just this, call them a pest and that will fix the problems.
Of course it will. Just on that, look, I think there's 3 key points to where we're going. You hit it on the head. They're not going away. They're here. So, let's stick with that at least, and not think we're going to be able to eradicate them, or some people think we're going to be able to eradicate them. We're in a really good place in deer hunting. We've never been – I grew up hunting in the very late 70s because I'm not anywhere near as old as Peter. Let's just call it the mid-80s. Hunting deer, and deer were mysterious in the 70s and 80s. There wasn't deer running down the Yarra River in Heidelberg. I grew up in the Yarra Valley. There wasn't deer in the Yarra Valley. Now there's deer in all those places. So there's a lot more deer than there ever was. There's a lot more deer hunters than there ever was. 50,000 plus deer hunters now. I think deer hunting's in a really, really, really good place. But what I feel we really need to do is start to have a measure of this effectiveness. So with all these control programs going on, no one knows what effect that's having. There's no real research around the effectiveness of those deer control programs, especially the mass ones that a lot of money is spent on, and also the impact that rec hunting's also having on those populations. So I think we really need to have an understanding of what the effectiveness of these control programs and recreational hunting put together are on these populations.
And ideally, back to David's idea of a strategy, ideally a strategy that seeks to target recreational hunting to areas where it can have the most effect. And we keep pointing to examples from New Zealand, like the stuff in the beech forests, the Fjord Wapiti Foundation work, but targeting rec hunting to actually reducing populations or keeping populations on a good level. It's not revolutionary. It's not. There's nothing crazy about it. It's done just over the ditch. We can do it here in Australia. We just need to think about things a bit differently.
It's been done in Europe for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Well, if we're looking at the future, I look at it a bit different. You're very involved in some excellent work on that, but it still always comes back to one word. As far as most hunters are concerned, it's a dirty word, and that's politics.
Yes.
It comes back to that. You cannot avoid it, and it continually changes. Apart from one thing, a lot of people think that hunting has no rightful place in society, that there is continually campaigns against that. But where I'm going with this is, and I think every hunter needs to be aware of this, without support for organisations like SSAA, ADA, Vic Hound Hunters, right? Without organisations like that, without support for them, and that means people need to join an organisation. I don't care what they join, but join an organisation that represents them and represents the voice of hunters. Because without it, right, without those organisations, we would not have what we have today, and we will not have in the future what we have today. And if I say anything to any hunter, it's join an association. And what we have today has been hard won. It has not just happened, but it can easily evaporate. Just like that. We saw it with John Cain when he was the when he was the Premier for Victoria. We saw it with him then, right? On the steps of Parliament, he was asked a question about deer hunting with dogs. Savage dogs was the word. Oh, totally abhorrent. That'll be banned tomorrow. And it would have been banned tomorrow if hunting organisations hadn't worked tirelessly to get that public statement reversed. That was a huge campaign, right? Driven then by volunteers with very little money behind it, but with absolute support from their membership. And what a lot of people think is that was just about hounds. It wasn't. It was all dogs, German Shorthairs, Labradors, everything was just going to be banned. So that's how easily it can be lost, right? But it's better, much better, to be proactive, talking to people before that happens and to do it. There are photos about what the deer think about being labelled the pest. And if you care to stick them on the end,
well, you've got to be nice to Ben.
Yes, we can do that.
What the deer think?
Yes, I'll show you the photo. Well, you're obviously going to see the photo. That's it. I don't think I'm just going to go over old ground.
Thank you very much for coming in today, Burkey. It's been a pleasure as always. A chat with you, even a sober chat with you, is always quite entertaining and illuminating.
No red wine.
No red wine involved today.
Do it. What? I come all this way for no red wine.
We're going to go to the brewery.
I'll get you a beer very soon.
There'll be alcohol
So
later.
thank you for coming in and joining us. Really appreciate your thoughts and your time. Stay tuned. Please like, subscribe, do all the good things with the podcast.
Join
we'll see you again
association.
soon. Yeah, join an association. And our boss would say join the Sporting Shooters Association of Australia. See you again soon.